For millennia, a man named Daniel recorded visions so precise that they mapped out world history long before it unfolded. While many consider his prophecies mere ancient accounts, a closer look reveals a startling pattern. The events he described are not only happening around us but are accelerating with each passing day. The visions of this Hebrew prophet, captured and taken to Babylon, were not mere dreams but divine revelations unveiling the times we live in today. What should alarm us most is not just the precision of these prophecies that have already come to pass, but those yet to come. Daniel saw empires rise and fall, beheld a succession of world powers, and ultimately witnessed the emergence of a final, terrifying beast, a global system unlike anything the world has ever known. If these visions are indeed manifesting before our eyes, what awaits us in the still unturned pages of human history? Daniel was not just another prophet. He was a flesh and blood man like you and me, torn from his homeland and forced to live in a foreign country under the rule of the mighty Babylonian Empire. Imagine being taken captive to an enemy nation, far from everything you knew and loved. This young Hebrew was educated in the sciences of the Chaldeans, learned their language and customs, yet never abandoned his faith. Even amidst oppression, Daniel remained true to his principles, refusing to compromise his integrity even when it meant facing death in the lion's den. What made Daniel truly extraordinary was not just his courage or wisdom, but his direct connection to the divine. While serving under different kings and empires, God revealed to him secrets that transcended time. These were not vague impressions or guesses. They were vivid, detailed, and precise visions unfolding before his eyes like a cosmic film showing future events. Can you imagine the weight of knowing humanity's future? Of seeing empires that didn't yet exist rise and then crumble? One night, while all of Babylon slept, Daniel had a dream that left him shaken and trembling. It wasn't an ordinary nightmare, but a divine revelation so powerful he had to document it immediately. Perhaps it was granted during sleep because, if awake, Daniel might have tried to rationalize or question what he saw. In dreams, we accept the extraordinary as normal, don't we? We speak with strange people, visit impossible places, and rarely question the logic of events. So it was with Daniel. He saw the impossible, the unbelievable, but knew in his heart it was real. Upon waking, with the images still vivid in his mind, Daniel quickly recorded all he had witnessed. His hands must have trembled as he wrote of terrifying beasts emerging from the sea, of an Ancient of Days, and of a Son of Man arriving on the clouds of heaven. These were not mere poetic symbols, but codes that would unveil the unfolding of human history. And today, thousands of years later, his writings remain preserved not just as historical relics, but as maps for our present time. Many have studied Daniel's prophecies over the centuries, attempting to decipher their mysteries, calculating dates, and predicting events. Kings and scholars have pored over these texts, seeking to unravel the enigma of the four beasts, the 70 weeks, the dream of the statue. How many have misinterpreted them? How many believed they were living in the last days, only to see their predictions fail? History is full of such missteps, but what if the error wasn't in the prophecies themselves, but in the timing of their understanding? Because, you see, there's something unique about our current time. Daniel was instructed to seal the book until the time of the end, a time when many will run to and fro, and knowledge will increase. Think about that for a moment. In what era of human history have people traveled as much as they do today? When has knowledge grown at such a rapid pace as in the last few decades? We're living in an age where we can cross the planet in hours, where information doubles every few years, where technology evolves almost daily. If this isn't running to and fro and the increase of knowledge, what is? What sets Daniel's visions apart from other ancient texts is their astonishing accuracy in predicting historical events. He described in detail the succession of world empires, from Babylon to powers that would emerge centuries later. Some scholars try to explain this by suggesting the texts were written after the events, but how do you account for the prophecies still unfulfilled? How do you explain the vision of a final global authority, a system controlling who can buy or sell, in an era when the world was fragmented into isolated kingdoms with no instant communication or global economy? Daniel's most striking vision, the one that left him literally trembling, was of the fourth beast, a terrifying creature unlike all the others, with 10 horns and a little horn rising among them. This vision wasn't just another empire in the succession of world powers. It was something entirely different, so disturbing that the prophet himself was shaken. Many have interpreted these symbols as representing ancient empires: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But does this traditional interpretation truly hold up when we examine the prophecy's details closely? Consider this. Daniel was told these 4 beasts represented kingdoms that would arise in the future. But when he had this vision, Babylon was already in power and nearing its fall. How could Babylon be a future beast? Furthermore, the text clearly states that the first 3 beasts, though they lost their dominion, would continue to exist even after the 4th beast's destruction. Yet the empires of Babylon, Persia, and Greece no longer exist. This suggests something far deeper, that these beasts represent forces or systems that would exist simultaneously in the last days, culminating in the rise of the most terrifying final beast. And here we reach the critical point. What if we're living exactly in the moment when this final beast is taking shape? Look around. We see nations aligning in unprecedented ways. We see power concentrating in the hands of a few. We see technologies emerging that enable control and surveillance on a global scale. Isn't the infrastructure for a unified world system already being built before our eyes? Aren't the winds of change blowing from the 4 corners of the earth, stirring the sea of humanity, setting the stage for the emergence of this final beast Daniel saw? Imagine waking in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, trembling, with vivid images of terrifying creatures still fresh in your mind. That's exactly what Daniel experienced. Not a mere nightmare, but a coded revelation about humanity's future. What disturbed him so much that he had to record this vision immediately? Daniel witnessed 4 heavenly winds violently stirring the Great Sea, a biblical metaphor often used to represent the chaotic mass of humanity. Peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues in constant turmoil. Few modern scholars recognize the symbolic depth of these 4 winds. In the original Hebrew, the word ruach means wind, spirit, and breath simultaneously, a 3-fold significance revealing far more than mere atmospheric currents. Couldn't we be dealing with spiritual entities operating behind the scenes of history? Invisible forces that, like cosmic winds, blow across the sea of humanity, generating ideologies, revolutions, and movements that seem to arise spontaneously in the collective consciousness. Think of how certain philosophies have captured entire nations almost overnight. Nazism, communism, globalism, as if blown into the material plane by some external source. From this turbulent sea, stirred by these spirit winds, Daniel saw 4 distinct beasts emerge. The first, like a lion with eagle's wings, majestic yet predatory. Traditional interpretation links this beast to the Babylonian Empire, with its blend of leonine strength and eagle-like swiftness. Yet the biblical text presents a fascinating anomaly. Its wings were torn off, it was lifted from the ground, set on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. This transformation from beast to something almost human suggests a system that initially operates by brute force but later assumes a more civilized guise, masking its predatory nature beneath a facade of humanity and rationality. The second beast arose as a bear raised up on one side, an unbalanced creature with 3 ribs between its teeth. This inherent imbalance doesn't just represent the Medo-Persian Empire as traditionally interpreted, but could symbolize fundamentally unequal economic systems. The bear, with its voracious appetite and periodic hibernation, doesn't it suggest cycles of rampant consumption followed by economic collapse? Don't the 3 ribs in its mouth represent vital resources or societal segments already devoured by this system? Think of how our modern global economy operates precisely this way, consuming natural resources, entire communities, and even cultures, while keeping billions in perpetual scarcity. The third beast emerged as a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, a creature of speed, adaptability, and distributed power. Traditionally tied to Alexander's Greek Empire, this creature represents far more than a specific historical empire. The leopard is known for its ability to adapt to diverse environments and its lightning-fast strikes. The 4 wings amplify this speed, while the 4 heads suggest distributed intelligence and the ability to observe in multiple directions simultaneously. Aren't we witnessing today the rise of information and technology systems that operate exactly this way? Social media, AI algorithms, big data, technologies that move at astonishing speed, adapt constantly, and are controlled by multiple global power centers that watch and influence nearly every aspect of human life. And then, the 4th beast, so terrifying that Daniel couldn't compare it to any known animal. dreadful, terrible, and exceedingly strong, with iron teeth that devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet. This creature wasn't just another empire in historical succession, it was something fundamentally different, transcending prior categories. Its 10 horns, biblical symbols of political authority, represented a confederation of powers united under a single system. Isn't it striking that Revelation describes a similar beast, saying, "The 10 horns are 10 kings, who will receive authority as kings for 1 hour with the beast"? Are we witnessing today the formation of this tenfold global structure through economic blocs, military alliances, and supranational organizations where sovereign nations increasingly cede authority to larger entities? The most disturbing element of this fourth beast, however, is the little horn that arises among the 10, uprooting 3 of them. Daniel describes it as having eyes like those of a man and a mouth speaking pompous words. This isn't a mere abstract political force, but a specific person, a leader who will emerge from this global system with extraordinary intelligence, the eyes, and unparalleled persuasive skill, the mouth. The prophetic text reveals that this individual will speak words against the Most High, persecute the saints, and attempt to change times and law, a fundamental restructuring of human social and spiritual order. Historically, various authoritarian leaders have exhibited aspects of this profile, but none have fully matched the prophetic description, suggesting this final figure is yet to come. What's fascinating about these 4 beasts is that, unlike the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, representing successive empires, Daniel is told these beasts are 4 kings who will arise from the earth, a future emergence, not a past one. Even more revealing, the text explicitly states that the first 3 beasts, though stripped of dominion, had their lives prolonged for a season and a time. They would continue to exist even after the 4th beast's destruction. This crucial detail, often overlooked by traditional interpreters, strongly suggests that these beasts don't merely represent sequential historical empires, but contemporary power systems that converge and operate simultaneously in the final period of human history. Yet Daniel's vision doesn't end with the dominion of these beasts. In dramatic contrast to the predatory chaos rising from the sea of humanity, Daniel then beholds a celestial scene where the Ancient of Days, a depiction of God in his eternal judicial authority, takes his seat to judge. The text describes wheels of burning fire, thousands upon thousands serving him, and 10,000 times 10,000 standing before him. The books are opened, judgment is set. The 4th beast is slain, its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. The other beasts, though persisting, lose all authority. This divine judgment isn't just the end of a historical cycle, but the definitive intervention in human history, the moment when predatory systems that have dominated humanity finally meet their end. The vision's conclusion then reveals one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven, approaching the Ancient of Days and receiving dominion, glory, and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is everlasting, his kingdom indestructible. In stark contrast to the beasts emerging from below, the stormy sea of humanity, this Son of Man comes from above, the clouds of heaven. While the beasts represent predatory human systems, this Son of Man represents divine governance established on earth, a kingdom of justice, peace, and truth that will finally replace the kingdoms of the beasts. The vision's final promise is that the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever and ever, a definitive transfer of authority from the beasts to those who remain faithful to the Most High during the time of tribulation. What makes this vision so extraordinarily relevant to our time is the unprecedented convergence of conditions that could enable the simultaneous rise of these systems. For the first time in human history, we have the technological, political, and economic infrastructure that could support a truly global government system. We have digital surveillance networks that can monitor billions of people. We have digital currencies that could replace physical money. We have artificial intelligence capable of processing and analyzing human behavior on a massive scale. We have instant communication systems connecting the entire planet. All the components needed for the manifestation of these prophesied beasts are already operational in our contemporary world. The framework is already in place, only the final pieces need to fall into alignment. As we contemplate the terrifying panorama of the 4 beasts, especially the last with its 10 horns and blasphemous little horn, we could easily fall into despair. But Daniel's vision doesn't end with the triumph of the beasts. In fact, the most glorious part of the vision is yet to come. After describing the 4th beast and the little horn, Daniel sees something that completely transforms the narrative. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. This contrast is absolutely intentional. After the bestial chaos rising from the stormy sea of humanity comes a scene of absolute celestial order. The Ancient of Days is one of the most majestic descriptions of God in all of Scripture. Daniel sees him with garments white as snow and hair like pure wool, seated on a throne of flaming fire with wheels of burning flame. This language isn't merely poetic. It communicates God's absolute purity, eternal wisdom, and consuming power. Can you picture such a scene? The Creator of the universe seated in judgment, with thousands upon thousands serving him and 10,000 times 10,000 attending his heavenly court? This is the moment when the forces of human history are finally called to account, when the books are opened and judgment is established. This celestial tribunal isn't a distant abstraction. It's the divine counterpoint to the apparent victory of the predatory systems represented by the beasts. Think about it. While human powers parade their authority, build their empires, and proclaim dominion over the earth, a higher court is watching, recording, and preparing for the final judgment. In our era of moral relativism, where many question the very existence of absolute truths, Daniel's vision reminds us that there is an eternal standard of justice against which all human actions will be measured. No matter how powerful world leaders become, how wealthy global corporations grow, or how influential ideological systems rise, they will all face the court of the Ancient of Days. The judgment is particularly directed at the fourth beast with its 10 horns, and especially the arrogant little horn. Daniel witnesses something astonishing. I watched till the beast was slain because of the pompous words the horn was speaking, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. This isn't just another cycle of empire rise and fall as human history has seen for millennia. This is the definitive end of a system, a destruction so complete it leaves no room for resurgence or continuity in any form. It's not a transfer of power from one empire to another, but the absolute elimination of a mode of existence. And then, in dramatic contrast to the beasts rising from the turbulent sea of humanity, Daniel sees one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. While the beasts emerge from below, the sea, this Son of Man comes from above, the clouds. While the beasts represent the most animalistic and instinctual aspects of humanity, predatory domination, violence, control, this Son of Man represents humanity's true potential, humanity as it was meant to be, in full alignment with the divine. Isn't it fascinating how these contrasting images convey profound truths about reality? On one side, human systems degenerating into bestiality. On the other, true human nature restored to its original dignity, descending from the heavens. This Son of Man is brought before the Ancient of Days and receives dominion, glory, and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and men of every language should serve him. His dominion is eternal. His kingdom will never be destroyed. Who is this figure? Jesus repeatedly claimed this title, Son of Man, in his teachings, explicitly connecting himself to this vision of Daniel. In fact, when questioned by the high priest during his trial if he was the Messiah, Jesus replied, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming with the clouds of heaven. A direct reference to Daniel's vision that his Jewish audience would instantly recognize. Isn't it extraordinary how these prophetic threads converge across centuries, weaving a coherent narrative that transcends authors and eras? What makes this passage especially significant is the transfer of authority. The beasts, representing predatory human systems, lose their dominion, and the kingdom is given to the Son of Man. But notice verse 27 closely. Then the kingdom and dominion, and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven, will be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. Not only does the Son of Man receive the kingdom, but this kingdom is shared with the saints of the Most High, those who remained faithful during the time of oppression. Have you ever considered what it means to be a co-heir of an eternal kingdom? Have you pondered the promise that those who suffer with Christ will also reign with him? This transition of power isn't just a replacement of one government with another, but a fundamental transformation in the nature of governance. The kingdoms of the beasts were characterized by domination, exploitation, and control. They devoured, broke in pieces, trampled. The kingdom of the Son of Man, in contrast, is characterized by justice, peace, and truth. It's a kingdom that elevates humanity rather than degrading it, that serves rather than exploits, that liberates rather than enslaves. Daniel's vision isn't just a prediction of future events, but a profound statement about two fundamentally opposed ways of wielding power: the bestial and the truly human. When Daniel awakens from this extraordinary vision, he is deeply troubled. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions of my head troubled me. He doesn't react like someone who just had an intriguing dream, but like someone who witnessed something so profound and unsettling it shook his understanding of reality. Even after receiving the angel's interpretation, Daniel remains greatly troubled in my thoughts, and my countenance changed. But I kept these things in my heart. Isn't this the appropriate response to divine revelations? Shouldn't we, like Daniel, be simultaneously disturbed and awestruck, recognizing that what we see only partially, we will fully experience in the unfolding of history? And so we come to the heart of the matter for us today. If Daniel's vision truly describes forces and systems converging in our time, are we prepared to discern the signs? Are we attentive to the contemporary manifestations of the beasts, predatory systems of political, economic, and technological power that devour, break in pieces, and trample? More importantly, are we aligned with the coming kingdom of the Son of Man, living as saints of the Most High, even while the bestial powers still exert their temporary influence? Daniel's vision wasn't given to us merely to satisfy our curiosity about the future, but to shape our identity and action in the present, to remind us that though the beasts may roar and dominate for a time, the Ancient of Days has already set his throne, the books have been opened, and the eternal kingdom of the Son of Man is the ultimate reality that will prevail. Among all the elements of Daniel's vision, perhaps none is as unsettling as the little horn that emerges among the 10 horns of the fourth beast. While the fourth beast itself represents an unprecedented global power system, this little horn signifies something even more sinister, a specific person who will arise from this system. Daniel describes it with captivating detail. It had eyes like those of a man and a mouth speaking pompous words. This isn't a mere abstract political structure, but an individual with extraordinary intelligence, the eyes, and exceptional persuasive ability, the mouth. The specific mention of eyes like those of a man suggests an almost superhuman insight and perception, someone who sees opportunities where others see only chaos, who manipulates circumstances with a shrewd understanding of human psychology. What makes this little horn particularly menacing is its path to power. Daniel tells us it will subdue 3 kings, eliminating 3 of the 10 authorities within the global system. This isn't a democratic transition of power, but a violent and calculated seizure of control. Think of how, throughout history, tyrants have often risen through purges and eliminations of rivals. Stalin consolidated his power by systematically removing political competitors. Hitler orchestrated the Night of the Long Knives to eliminate threats within his own party. Mao launched the Great Purge to remove those who questioned his vision. The pattern is consistent. Absolute power often comes with the violent removal of obstacles. The little horn follows this exact model, but on an unprecedented global scale. The biblical text is remarkably specific about this individual's actions. Daniel tells us he will speak words against the Most High, persecute the saints of the Most High, and intend to change times and law. This isn't just another ambitious political figure. This is someone who deliberately opposes God and seeks to rewrite the foundations of human civilization. The phrase, change times and law, is particularly revealing. In Hebrew tradition, times, zaman, refers to the divinely ordained cycles structuring human life: days, weeks, months, years, religious festivals. Law, dat, refers to the moral and ethical principles established by God. We're talking, then, about someone who will attempt to fundamentally reorder not just political and economic structures, but the temporal and moral bedrock of human society. Historically, attempts to change times and law aren't without precedent. During the French Revolution, Robespierre and his associates tried to implement a new calendar that eliminated the 7-day week and fully secularized time. The Soviets attempted something similar with their 5-day week and later 6-day week, seeking to eradicate Sunday as a day of rest and worship. Totalitarian regimes have consistently tried to rewrite moral codes, defining right and wrong not by transcendent principles, but by state ideology. Aren't these attempts to change times and law exactly what Daniel foresaw? And what emerging technologies today could enable such changes on a global scale? With digital systems increasingly controlling our calendars, transactions, and even definitions of identity, aren't we witnessing the creation of the perfect infrastructure for such a temporal and moral revolution? The description of the little horn gains even greater clarity when we examine the parallel text in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where Paul speaks of the man of lawlessness, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. This figure doesn't just oppose God, but presumes to take his place, the ultimate blasphemy. John, in his first epistle, calls this figure the Antichrist. Not just someone against Christ, but someone who seeks to replace Christ, presenting himself as the true embodiment of divinity and the legitimate object of human worship. Can you imagine the charisma, persuasive power, and psychological manipulation required for someone to present themselves as divine and be accepted as such by much of humanity? And yet, history is full of charismatic figures who convinced masses to follow absurd and destructive ideologies. How much more powerful will this persuasion be when amplified by modern communication and manipulation technologies? The most frightening aspect of the little horn isn't its political or military power, but its power over the human mind. Daniel describes it with a mouth speaking great things, an extraordinary communicative ability, a persuasive eloquence that captivates multitudes. Throughout history, we've seen how charismatic orators can mesmerize entire nations, turning ordinary citizens into fanatics willing to commit atrocities. Hitler didn't conquer Germany primarily through military might, but through rhetorical skill that mobilized millions. And that was before television, before the internet, before social media, before AI algorithms that can tailor persuasive messages to each individual based on their psychographic data. Imagine such persuasive ability amplified by modern technologies that can reach billions instantly, technologies that can literally alter perceptions of reality. Wouldn't these be the perfect conditions for the rise of a figure like the little horn? The book of Revelation adds critical details to this portrait, describing how this final leader will implement an entirely new economic system. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark. This depicts total economic control, where the very ability to participate in commerce depends on submission to this leader and his system. For centuries, such surveillance and unified economic control seemed technically impossible. How could anyone monitor every global transaction? How could a single system dictate who can or cannot participate in the world economy? Such questions seem to relegate these prophecies to the realm of metaphor or hyperbole. But today, with digital identification systems, centrally controlled digital currencies, biometric technologies, the Internet of Things, and ubiquitous surveillance, the infrastructure for exactly such a system already exists or is in advanced development. What seemed technically impossible just a generation ago now seems not only possible, but imminent. What makes this figure especially dangerous is that he won't initially appear as an overtly evil tyrant. Daniel uses the term little horn, something that begins seemingly insignificant, almost unnoticed, before growing in power and influence. Revelation suggests this figure will present an image of peace and solution, rising in a moment of global crisis as the Savior who brings order to chaos. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" Notice the element of marveling, even worship. This isn't a tyrant subjugating a reluctant population, but a leader who genuinely captures the imagination and loyalty of the masses. It's precisely this seductive element that makes him so dangerous. He will be loved, not just feared. In a world fractured by ethnic, religious, political, and economic divisions, how appealing would a figure be who promises to unify humanity, resolve global crises, and establish order and prosperity? The temporal indication Daniel provides about this little horn's reign is intriguing: a time, times, and half a time. This enigmatic phrase is generally interpreted as 3.5 years, a relatively short period, but one of unprecedented intensity. Isn't it interesting how periods of greatest human trauma and transformation often occur in relatively brief windows? World War II lasted 6 years, but fundamentally altered the global order for generations. The French Revolution, in its most intense phase, spanned just a few years, but permanently reshaped European society. The Bolshevik Revolution transformed Russia in a matter of months. Periods of greatest transformation and trauma are rarely long. They're intense, concentrated, cataclysmic. The little horn's reign will follow this pattern, relatively brief, but so profound in impact that it will permanently alter human consciousness. As we contemplate this disturbing figure, it's crucial to remember that his emergence doesn't happen in a vacuum. The little horn arises among the 10 horns of the fourth beast. He's a product of an already established system. This is a profound point. Tyrants don't create the conditions for their rise. They exploit conditions already in place. Hitler didn't create German resentment post-Versailles or the hyperinflation that devastated the middle class. He exploited them. Stalin didn't create the post-revolution instability in Russia. He capitalized on it. Likewise, the Antichrist won't create the conditions for his rise from scratch. He'll emerge from systems and structures already established, presenting himself as the solution to crises he didn't initiate but will masterfully manipulate. Aren't we already witnessing the formation of these conditions? Climate crises, pandemics, economic instability, social polarization, the collapse of traditional value systems, all creating a leadership vacuum and a collective desperation for someone to fix it all? This dark chapter of Daniel's vision confronts us with an uncomfortable reality. Humanity's vulnerability to manipulation, our tendency to idolize charismatic figures who promise security and solutions, our willingness to sacrifice freedom for convenience. The little horn isn't just a distant prophetic figure, but a warning about tendencies present in every human generation, a tendency that seems to be culminating in our era of advanced technology, global communication, and converging crises. The question isn't just, will we recognize this figure when he arises? But also, are we unwittingly creating the conditions for his rise? We hunger for strong leaders who solve our problems. We crave simple solutions to complex challenges. We're easily seduced by charismatic rhetoric and grand promises. Aren't these the very conditions Daniel saw preceding the little horn's emergence? Among all the elements of Daniel's visions, perhaps the most fascinating is their chronological precision. Daniel didn't just see what would happen, but received extraordinarily specific information about when it would happen. Consider the famous 70 weeks prophecy in chapter 9. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. This isn't a vague or ambiguous timeline, but a precise measure of time divided into specific segments: 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and a final week. The angel Gabriel informs Daniel that the countdown would begin with the command to restore and build Jerusalem, a verifiable historical event, and extend until Messiah the Prince. It's hard to overstate the precision of this prophecy. Scholars who calculate the 69 weeks, 483 prophetic years, from Artaxerxes' decree in 445 before Christ arrived exactly at Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, days before his crucifixion. What other prophetic book offers predictions with such mathematical accuracy? Equally intriguing is the temporal measure Daniel assigns to the little horn's reign: a time, times, and half a time. This same formula reappears in Revelation as 42 months, or 1,260 days. The consistency is striking. Somehow, this 3.5-year period is encoded in Scripture as the designated time for the final manifestation of anti-Christian power. This isn't a literary coincidence. It's a deliberate divine pattern woven into the prophecies. Note that this is exactly half of a prophetic week of 7 years. It's as if the powers of darkness are granted only half the time they initially sought. Isn't it fascinating how God limits evil even in its chronology? Jesus himself reflected this truth when he said, "If those days had not been shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened." Time is always in God's hands, even the time allotted to the forces of evil. What makes this measure of time particularly significant is its parallel with Jesus' earthly ministry. Christ served publicly for approximately 3.5 years before his crucifixion, the same duration attributed to the final anti-Christian power. This symmetry is deeply meaningful. The true Christ had 3.5 years to establish his spiritual kingdom. The false Christ will have 3.5 years to establish his earthly reign. During his ministry, Jesus healed the sick, fed the hungry, and freed the oppressed. During the Antichrist's reign, the prophetic text indicates he will wound, starve, and oppress. They are two diametrically opposed kingdoms, operating for the same length of time, one as a distorted reflection of the other. Isn't this a perfect illustration of the nature of evil? Not an original force, but a perversion and inversion of the good? The 70 weeks prophecy, however, poses a fascinating interpretive challenge. While the first 69 weeks, 483 years, led to Christ's first coming, the 70th week, the final 7 years, seems detached, separated by an unspecified interval. Indeed, many theologians believe we're living precisely in this interval between the 69th and 70th weeks, a parenthesis in prophetic time corresponding to the church age. This pause in Daniel's countdown aligns with other biblical patterns. Paul writes of the fullness of the Gentiles that must occur before God resumes his specific focus on Israel. Jesus spoke of the times of the Gentiles that must be fulfilled. It's as if Israel's prophetic clock has been temporarily paused to allow the development of a broader spiritual reality. The church composed of both Jews and Gentiles, before the focus narrows again to the final events centered on Jerusalem. The implication of this temporal structure is profound. If Daniel's 70th week still lies in the future, then we're living in the final moments before its inauguration. The signs Jesus mentioned as indicators of the end, wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, persecutions, wouldn't be mere isolated events, but global intensifications heralding the start of this final week. Think of it like the darkening sky before a great storm. The distant thunder and rising wind aren't the storm itself, but unmistakable signs of its imminent approach. Perhaps this is why Jesus emphasized the importance of discerning the signs of the times. When you see all these things, know that it is near, at the doors. The question every generation must honestly consider is, are we witnessing just another cycle of historical turbulence, or are we seeing the specific signs heralding Daniel's 70th week? What's fascinating about Daniel's prophetic chronology is how it fits precisely with other temporal milestones in Scripture. Revelation repeatedly mentions periods of 1,260 days, 42 months or 3.5 years, exactly half of Daniel's 70th week. The prophet mentions 1,290 days and 1,335 days, suggesting specific events occurring slightly beyond the main tribulation period. There's also the mysterious reference to the abomination of desolation, which Jesus explicitly tied to Daniel, marking it as a critical temporal milestone. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time. No, nor ever shall be. The chronological precision of these prophecies is staggering. They aren't vague predictions that could fit any era, but specific time measures anchored to identifiable events. Can you think of another ancient prophetic text with such mathematical accuracy that has stood the test of time? Even more intriguing is how Daniel connects celestial events with earthly chronologies. When the angel explains the vision of the 2,300 days after which the sanctuary will be cleansed, he's weaving celestial and terrestrial realities into a single temporal narrative. Likewise, the vision of the statue in chapter 2 presents a progression of kingdoms culminating with a stone, cut out without hands, that destroys all prior kingdoms and grows to fill the whole earth. This stone, clearly representing God's kingdom, breaks into human history at a specific moment, not randomly, but at the height of the system represented by the feet of iron and clay. Isn't it fascinating how God's timing works? It's not like our mechanical clocks ticking off indistinguishable seconds, but like a meticulously composed symphony where each note sounds exactly when it must to create the intended effect. The breaking of the seals in Revelation, the sounding of the trumpets, the pouring of the bowls, all follow an ordered progression that echoes the temporal framework already established in Daniel. It's as if Daniel provided the temporal skeleton and Revelation added flesh to those bones, creating a vivid and detailed portrait of the final events. And what makes this truly extraordinary is that both books, written centuries apart by different authors in different cultures and languages, fit together with pinpoint precision. This isn't the kind of consistency you'd expect from merely human texts, especially considering that John had no way to study Daniel's book to ensure alignment. He simply recorded what he saw, just as Daniel had centuries earlier. The perfect harmony between these visions, separated by centuries, is itself a testament to the divine origin of these revelations. What should we take from these such precise temporal measures? First, the certainty that history isn't a chaotic stream of random events, but a divinely orchestrated narrative moving inexorably toward a predetermined climax. Human kingdoms rise and fall not by chance, but within time boundaries set by the Creator who changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. Second, these chronologies remind us that evil has an expiration date. No matter how dominant the powers of darkness seem, Their time is strictly limited. A time, times, and half a time. Not a day more, not an hour more. There's something deeply comforting in this knowledge. Suffering has an end, injustice has an end, oppression has an end. As Paul wrote, our light and momentary affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. Finally, these temporal measures call us to vigilance and discernment. Jesus rebuked the crowds for knowing how to interpret the sky to predict the weather, but not knowing how to discern the signs of the times. The Pharisees and Sadducees missed the most significant moment in history, the coming of the Messiah himself, because, despite knowing the scriptures, they failed to connect the prophecies to contemporary events. Isn't that ironic? Those who should have been the first to recognize the fulfillment of Daniel's timeline were the ones who crucified the Messiah the Prince, who arrived exactly when Daniel predicted he would. The lesson is clear: knowing prophecy isn't enough. We must develop the ability to discern its application in the real world, in real time. How many today know Daniel's prophecies but, like the Pharisees, might be completely blind to their fulfillment unfolding before their very eyes? As we observe the world today, it's impossible not to notice how everything seems to be accelerating. Technology advances exponentially. Global crises erupt simultaneously. Social structures that lasted millennia are being redefined in decades or even years. There's an almost palpable sense that history is compressing, that we're approaching some kind of singularity point. Daniel captured this acceleration when he was told that in the time of the end, many will run to and fro, and knowledge will increase. This historical speed-up would itself be a temporal sign, an indication that the prophetic clock is nearing its final moments. Jesus used the metaphor of birth pains to describe the signs of the end, contractions increasing in frequency and intensity as the moment of birth approaches. Aren't we witnessing exactly that today? Events that once occurred decades apart now seem to happen simultaneously, like overlapping contractions heralding an imminent birth. In this case, the birth of a new era. How, then, should we live in light of these temporal measures? With unwavering certainty in the final outcome of history, but also with an urgent sense of our responsibility in the present moment. Knowing that the prophetic clock advances inexorably toward its predetermined climax, every moment becomes precious, every decision consequential. We aren't mere passive spectators in this cosmic drama. We're active participants, called to be the light of the world precisely when the darkness seems deepest. Like Daniel, who served faithfully in pagan Babylon even while receiving visions of the end times, we're called to live in the tension between the present reality and the promised reality. We must neither withdraw from the world in passive waiting nor compromise with systems doomed to destruction, but maintain our primary citizenship in the eternal kingdom while serving as its ambassadors in the passing kingdom. The time is short, the stakes eternal. As the clock ticks toward prophetic midnight, our mission has never been clearer or more urgent. We've reached the culminating point of our journey through Daniel's visions. After exploring his prophetic dreams, the meaning of the four beasts, the role of the little horn, the divine judgment, and the measure of prophetic time, we're left to face the most important question of all. What will we do with this knowledge? The prophecies weren't recorded merely to satisfy our curiosity about the future, but to provoke a response, a decision. Have you ever noticed how the most vital information in life often demands a stance? There's no neutrality in the face of Daniel's revelations. We either receive them as divine warnings that must shape our choices, or we relegate them to the category of historical curiosities with no practical relevance to our existence. Consider how Daniel himself responded to the visions he received. He didn't simply record them and continue his life unchanged. On the contrary, the text tells us he was greatly troubled and that his countenance changed. The revelations drove him to intense periods of prayer, fasting, and intercession for the nation. In one particularly poignant moment, we read that Daniel was so distressed by what he'd seen that he spent 3 weeks in mourning, refusing fine foods, meat, wine, and any form of self-indulgence. He was a man transformed by the revelations he received. Wouldn't this be the appropriate response to the unveiling of divine plans? If we truly believe Daniel's prophecies are being fulfilled in our time, how can we go on living as if nothing extraordinary is happening? This is the paradox of our time. We've never had such access to information about biblical prophecies, and we've never had such practical indifference to them. In churches today, In-depth studies of Daniel and Revelation are often relegated to specialized conferences or optional study groups, as if they're advanced topics relevant only to enthusiasts. And when these books are taught, the focus often falls on chronological details and theoretical interpretations, rarely touching the fundamental question: how should we live in light of these revelations? Jesus criticized the Pharisees for knowing how to interpret the sky to predict the weather, but not knowing how to discern the signs of the times. Aren't we making the same mistake today, meticulously studying prophecies while failing to adjust our lives according to their urgent implications? The book of Daniel offers us three models of response to divine revelations, embodied in three historical figures. First, there's King Nebuchadnezzar, who received prophetic dreams directly from God and witnessed stunning miracles, but whose response was inconsistent and temporary. He oscillated between moments of acknowledging God and returns to arrogance and idolatry. His son Belshazzar knew all these events: Daniel's dream interpretations, the king's temporary madness, his restoration, and public confession of God's power, but chose to ignore these lessons entirely, culminating in the blasphemous feast where he used the temple's sacred vessels to glorify his pagan gods. And then there's Daniel himself, who not only received the revelations but allowed them to fundamentally transform his worldview, priorities, and lifestyle. These three figures represent the three possible responses we can give to the prophecies: Nebuchadnezzar's inconsistency, accepting them intellectually but failing to consistently integrate them into our lives; Belshazzar's rejection, knowing them but deliberately ignoring their implications; or Daniel's transformation, allowing them to fundamentally reorient our existence. The question isn't just, do you believe in Daniel's prophecies? But how are Daniel's prophecies shaping your daily life, your values, decisions, and priorities? Faith without works is dead, and belief in prophecies without a corresponding response is equally empty. When was the last time your understanding of prophecy led you to change something tangible in your everyday life? The most disturbing aspect of the fourth beast, with its 10 horns and blasphemous little horn, isn't its political or military power, but its power of seduction. Daniel writes that the little horn had eyes like those of a man, suggesting extraordinary intelligence and perception, and a mouth speaking great things, indicating persuasive eloquence and the ability to inspire masses. In other words, its power lies not primarily in coercion, but in persuasion, not in brute force, but in psychological manipulation. This is the true threat we face today. Not simply oppressive political or economic structures, but systems of thought, narratives, and philosophies that capture the human imagination, redefining good and evil, truth and lies. Do you see how, even now, a fundamental redefinition of basic concepts like man, woman, family, freedom, and even reality itself is underway? Isn't this exactly the strategy Daniel foresaw, the attempt to change times and law? In Daniel's vision, the little horn made war against the saints and prevailed against them. It's fascinating to note that this war isn't primarily physical, but ideological and spiritual. It takes place in the realm of ideas, values, and worldviews. Revelation complements this vision by revealing that the mark of the beast, without which no one can buy or sell, isn't universally imposed by force, but willingly accepted by most. People receive it because they've been convinced, persuaded, seduced by the great things spoken by the system. Consider how, in 20th century totalitarian regimes, physical repression was always preceded by massive propaganda campaigns. Before the concentration camps came the films, posters, and speeches that dehumanized specific groups, redefining them as threats to society. The urgent question for us today isn't simply, would you recognize oppressive political structures? But, would you notice when you're being subtly conditioned to accept ideas and values contrary to divine truth? In the face of this ideological and spiritual war, what should our response be? Daniel offers a surprisingly countercultural model. Rather than organizing public protests or political rebellions against Babylon, which would have been the natural response of a patriotic Jew whose country had been conquered, Daniel chose a different path. He cultivated an inner life of extraordinary integrity and spiritual discipline. The text tells us that, 3 times a day, he knelt before his open window facing Jerusalem and prayed. He maintained an unshakable regularity in his spiritual practices, regardless of external circumstances or royal decrees. When a decree forbade petitions to any god or man except the king for 30 days, Daniel continued his usual practice without hesitation, not as an act of political rebellion, but as an expression of his non-negotiable faithfulness to God. Wouldn't this be exactly the response we need to cultivate today? An inner life so rooted in divine truth that it becomes impervious to the seductive philosophies of this world? The book of Daniel ends with an extraordinary promise. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. This isn't a promise of escape from difficulties or political victory in this world. It's an assurance of transcendent meaning for those who remain faithful in times of darkness. Just as Daniel shone in the Babylonian court, maintaining his integrity while serving with excellence, we're called to shine in our own Babylonian exile, this world system that, though temporary, still holds sway over our present time. The metaphor of shining like stars is particularly significant. Stars don't eliminate the darkness of night. They shine within it, offering guidance, hope, and beauty. Likewise, we aren't called to eradicate all the corrupt systems of this world that will happen only with Christ's return, but to shine within them as witnesses to a transcendent reality. This tension between engagement and separation, being in the world but not of it, is perfectly exemplified in Daniel's life. He served faithfully in pagan administrations for decades, contributing positively to societies that didn't share his values. Simultaneously, he maintained non-negotiable boundaries, refusing to compromise his allegiance to God even when it meant facing the lion's den. This delicate balance is exactly what we need to cultivate today. We can't withdraw entirely from society, creating isolated enclaves while the world burns. Nor can we integrate so fully that we lose our distinct identity as God's people. The call is to be like Daniel, fully present, offering the best of our talents and abilities for the common good, while maintaining an unwavering faithfulness to divine truth, even when that faithfulness comes at a personal cost. Have you been able to maintain this challenging balance, or have you oscillated between isolation and compromise? Daniel's visions don't end with the triumph of the little horn or the beasts. They culminate with the establishment of the eternal kingdom of the Son of Man, a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and that will consume all those kingdoms, but it will stand forever. This is the ultimate horizon of hope that must guide our perspective. No matter how powerful the empires of this world seem, how persuasive their propaganda, or how insurmountable their systems, they are temporary. One day, like the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, they'll be reduced to dust by the kingdom that fills the whole earth. This certainty shouldn't lead us to fatalistic passivity, since it's all going to end, why bother? But to unshakable courage. It's precisely because we know the end of the story that we can live the present with integrity, refusing to bow to pressures of conformity or succumb to fear. Looking at the example of Daniel and his three friends, we see how certainty of God's ultimate triumph didn't lead them to inaction, but to extraordinary steadfastness in the face of threats, to a courage that transformed kingdoms and revealed God's power to entire nations. What will we do with this prophetic knowledge? Will we be like Nebuchadnezzar, briefly acknowledging divine sovereignty only to return to our old ways? Will we be like Belshazzar, knowing the truth but choosing to defy it until our final moment? Or will we be like Daniel, allowing divine revelation to transform not just our understanding, but our character, priorities, and daily actions? In a time of growing darkness, we're called to shine like stars, offering guidance and hope to a world heading toward its prophetic climax. The choice is before us, and it's never been more urgent than now. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected some videos for you filled with profound insights and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step to transforming your reality.